So that's the global stock take, and that's what my colleagues have been spending the first days of this COP in the trenches, trying to negotiate what is going to be the mother of all cover decisions, I suppose, in sending the signals across the board of what has to happen next. Key to that is the signals with regard to the expectation of the next round of NDCs. So the current NDCs for most parties indicate their emissions pathways only up to 2030. By COP30, 2 years from now, we need to see the NDCs from all parties that will take us the next step, for most from 2030 to 2035. And that's when you will actually begin to see whether those targets and the policies underpinning those targets are putting countries on a pathway to net zero and doing it quickly enough for us to remain within 1.5 degrees. So the GST has to send all those signals across all those policy areas in, as Valvanera said, as clear and precise terms as possible. The second thing that makes this COP unique was the mandate that we didn't get from Paris in 2015, but rather we got only a year ago in Sharm el-Sheikh, which was to develop new funding arrangements and a fund to assist developing countries, particularly vulnerable developing countries, in addressing loss and damage. I and my colleagues were very concerned that we would have to deal with that at a ministerial level at this COP alongside all the other existing mandates of Paris. But as Valvanera said, we managed to get the COP off to a good start by endorsing the recommendations of the Transitional Committee that's been working on this issue over the past year, getting that fund operationalized, and of course that remarkable pledging conference that started off with a pledge from the UAE, then from Germany, and then from a whole cascading set of pledges from other countries as well, and really a historical moment in terms of a gesture and investment in the kind of solidarity that we know is essential for keeping this regime together. The third thing that makes this COP unique, of course, is where we are in the United Arab Emirates. An incredible host. I think this is what we've been referring to in the EU as peak COP, both in terms of the numbers, but also in terms of the facilities and the support that's been laid out for us through incredible generosity of hospitality to make sure that we're negotiating in as good conditions as possible for this very special GST COP. But it also means, as you heard in the previous press conference, that the eyes of the world are on this country and the fact that it has built its wealth and all this generosity on the basis of oil and gas and fossil fuel production, and has committed, as you've heard today, to phasing out fossil fuels in a way that can ensure that they are contributing and we are all contributing to that pathway to net zero and to ensuring that we keep 1.5 degrees in reach. So that's what makes unique about this COP. What is very familiar, of course, is that we're now in our usual negotiating tracks in the first week of the COP, moving back and forth between the different agenda items, relying upon co-facilitators to produce texts which are either being welcomed by the parties or rejected by the parties, building gradually from the bottom up a set of documents that we hope will be taken to as much of a conclusion in this first week of negotiations as possible, but leading inevitably some very important political questions for ministers to resolve in the second week. Exactly what those questions are, we can't fully speculate on, but we imagine that this issue of how we're going to address fossil fuels will be atop the list. But we're also looking for some clear signals, as I said before, on adaptation. What's the inspiring message that we can agree through these negotiations to ensure that we're all on the same path with regard to ensuring that we're reducing vulnerability and we're enhancing resilience, particularly for the vulnerable, the most vulnerable. And what signs can we send about where the support is going to be coming from financially from both public and private sources. Happy to get into some of the details on what that might mean in terms of the text that's emerging in the question and answer period, but that's essentially what I would say would be a good opening to our first press conference here as the EU.
Okay, thanks Jake and Valvanera. I think we have around 15 minutes for questions, so I just ask you to identify yourselves and say which media outlet you're from, And I'll take 2 or 3 questions at a time for Jake and Barbanera. Okay, we'll take the gentleman on the second row and the lady just behind on the third row.
Lukas Scheidt for Table Media. COP President just mentioned that he doesn't have red lines on language on fossil fuels. So have you brought forward the language that the European member states have in their council conclusions, the language on fossil fuels, and who's grouping together with this language? There were 80 countries last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. What is the situation here? On that. Thank you.
Abnet from Reuters. It's a very similar question. Could you give us an update on the fossil fuel negotiations? And just to clarify, do you consider the UAE to be aligned with the EU's position to phase out unabated fossil fuels?
Do you want to take another?
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for the question, and we have passed the message in many ways, informally, formally, and in many through different channels. We have been working with the parties and also with the presidency since in all the ministerials and also in the pre-COP, but formally also in the negotiating rooms, in which we have presented our inputs to the different documents in the different rooms, specifically in the GST draft decision that have launched the other day, and in which we have included the words of our council conclusions in paragraph 14 and 15. So in every meeting that we have the occasion, we are very outspoken on this issue in the negotiating rooms, but also in our bilaterals with the presidency and with other country parties, because the alliances need to be built from parties in order to create, the consensus that we are looking for. On the presidency, I think that there was a previous conference in which the COP president said that, and we heard that in publicly also, that they want language on the fossil fuels, and there will be, a consensus around that language. So we are in the first step of the negotiations. We don't have clear view on that, because he should be a honest broker at the end of the process. So it's important to also let the parties work, let the parties find alliance, and try to keep the process, as ambitious as possible, as he mentioned. But Jake.
Yeah, I mean, not much to add other than, of course, we come into these negotiations with our expectations probably more clearly on our sleeve than any other party through the fact that we have the published council conclusions. And, of course, that's what we would like to see the rest of the international community to agree to. But we've also had the experience of negotiating those council conclusions. So we know how difficult it is, even within the 27, to reach absolute precision on language in terms of the signals that we want to send. So we don't come here expecting that all parties are going to agree to that immediately. But we do think that there is a lot of alignment. If you look at other statements that are coming from other groups, if you look at the signals, for example, the High Ambition Coalition has been sending, the Pacific Island Forum has been sending, that there is a lot of alignment of text, but there's also kind of variations as to how you can essentially send the same set of signals aligned with the science that you just heard from the IPCC, which clearly indicates that you can't remain within 1.5 degrees without phasing out unabated fossil fuels as soon as possible. So that is something that we think any variation on language has to send that signal.
Okay, I'll take a question here on the front row, and just at the back there, gentleman in white, and then we'll see if we've got time for some more.
Hi, Rebecca from Carbon Pulse. I'm just wondering if the CBAM is hindering negotiations, because I heard some very strong reactions and comments from South Africa on it, saying that it could destroy their economy. So, yeah, wondering if this is a problem.
Kohlmeier from Euractiv. You said the presidency should be an honest broker. Do you currently perceive them as such, given the rather emotional outburst of Dr. Sultan just 30 minutes ago, launching into tirades against the media, for one? And secondly, just to clarify, do you believe that you have succeeded at driving a wedge of sorts between the G77 and China, which I understand to be instrumental to getting an agreement on a final text that is relatively ambitious?
Okay, maybe take one more here, the gentleman in the blue shirt, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, Tim Stickings from the National UAE. Just to get very technical on the outputs, are we expecting the GST just to consist of the CMA decision, or is there going to be a declaration alongside it? And would any UNFCCC decision also sort of shout out to the stocktake in some way? Thank you.
Maybe I'll take the first round of questions, and then Valvanera can complement. We on the negotiating floor, there is no discussion of individual parties' policies. Of course, there are in press conferences and in other circumstances. So, in direct answer to your question, no, the CBAM is not undermining the multilateral negotiations. What I think we saw from the outset of the conference is an increasing desire for parties to have a conversation about what are referred to as unilateral trade measures. The fact that many countries around the world, as they are putting in place more ambitious climate policy, are recognizing that there is a relationship between those climate policies and their impacts on trade. Some positive, in that they increase the flows, for example, of energy efficient and renewable energy technologies and products, and some that are more what people would characterize in a negative way. So there's an appetite to do that, and you saw that in the form of a proposal for an agenda item from the Basic Group on what they refer to as unilateral trade measures. We move forward on the understanding that there's already a space in this process to discuss the relationship between climate policies and their cross-border effects, and that's in the Response Measures Forum and what we call the Katowice Committee on Implementation, the KCI. And on that basis, we move forward because response measures is one of the themes that the GST will address itself. So we expect these political messages of concern to continue to come up in the conversations of the GST. They did yesterday, for those of you who were following the different elements of that conversation. But no, we don't expect them to derail the conversations. Mostly because I don't think any party expects this to be a forum for a discussion on any party's particular measures. If we went down that track, there are many concerns that many parties have about their policies. No country lives in isolation. We all have open markets, and we're affected by the choices that we make. If we want to do that, there's a whole other institution and forum to do that. That's if it comes to trade measures, that's the World Trade Organization. Maybe I'll leave to Valvanera to reflect on the issues that were raised in the previous press conference with regard to Dr. Sultan. I didn't really understand the question about the relationship between China and the G77. The politics of this process are incredibly complex, and it is true that the G77 and China coordinate their positions on a daily basis. But once you get to the negotiating floor, you see that there are many, many differences between the various groups that have emerged over the years within the G77. So it's not about driving wedges. It's about identifying who your closer negotiating partners are and building coalitions in our perspective, to try to produce as progressive an outcome as possible. Very technical question about the nature of the decisions that will come out of this process. I think there's still some open questions about what the big negotiated products will be. No doubt there will be a decision coming from the CMA, the governing body of the Paris Agreement, on the GST, and that, because of, as I said before, of its broad encompassing nature, will cover nearly everything I think that the parties will want to say. There have been some ideas about capturing the messages that came from the leaders' event. My guess is that will largely be the President's task in terms of producing any document. But we will also be listening to each other's leaders and making sure that the most positive messages that they've delivered end up in the negotiating texts as well. So we'll have to kind of watch that space, but all of the negotiating attention is going to be on that GST decision as being the main source of signals. So
on the question of Sultan, what I can say is that all, including the COP president, wanted to have a good result at this COP28. It's as Jake mentioned, a unique COP for many reasons. It's the first time that we assessed the validity of the Paris Agreement, and I think that it's very important to show that Paris Agreement is still alive and is useful for the task that we have in front of us. So yes.
Okay. Any further questions? I'll take a question here on the left-hand side, lady in white.
Hi, I'm Amy Williams from the Financial Times. If you can't get all of the parties to agree on language that looks like the G7 language on phasing out unabated fossil fuels, where do you think you might be able to land as a second-best formulation? Could you sketch out some other possibilities that the parties might be able to coalesce around? Thank you.
Then maybe over here.
Hi, Josh Gavitis from Carbon Brief. What are the EU's positions on setting goals for adaptation finance as part of the global goal on adaptation, and also following the agreement on the loss and damage fund, what about specific goals for loss and damage finance under the new collective quantified goal for finance? Thanks.
Shall we take one more? Sure. And the lady here on the fourth row back in white.
Hi, Caroline Varin from Argus Media. There's a variety of position from countries that are supporting phase out of fossil fuels. Unabated, fossil fuel phase down, phase out. Are we going to have enough time to iron that out? And also, how are you going to bridge the massive gap between the countries who are against it, including Russia, who clearly said they will not support this? Is it a unanimous? Do we need a unanimous decision on this?
I would say that it is too early in this process to be publicly speculating about landing grounds. You know our opening position. We're going to strive to build a consensus around that. We feel like we have a lot of support from a big diversity of parties, to your question as well. And we've been in this process long enough to know that consensus forms in this process by creating that kind of groundswell of support that comes from parties but also comes from the outside world as well. And we feel like we're coming into this COP with a strong wind behind us in terms of wanting that clear signal on fossil fuels, and count on you to report on that as well. In terms of adaptation finance, of course, we have a goal agreed in Sharm short term, which is doubling the adaptation finance from near current baselines. There is a conversation that will happen next year in the context of the new collective quantified goal, which will describe how it is that we will be continuing to deliver on public finance and other sources of finance over the medium and longer term from the 2025 period onwards. And I think that's the right moment to reflect on how we can continue to accelerate more and more resources coming from all public sources going into adaptation. As Valdenera said in her opening remarks, we all recognize that is the challenge. It's where the private sector is not responding for many understandable reasons, and where we have to build that base of public support in order to ensure that we are investing in resilience in countries that need our help. Same issue with regard to loss and damage is slightly different, I would say. in that with the creation of this fund and the identification of these funding arrangements, it's really the first time that we have begun to define what loss and damage finance is. Up until now, we've been recognizing that there is a lot of finance that's flowing existingly to help countries that are being impacted by climate change to recover from those impacts that range everywhere from immediate humanitarian relief to the kind of development assistance that are provided, for example, by multilateral development banks in a post-impact context. We've just created a fund that has a mandate to basically fill the gaps in that existing arrangement. And so I would say the first set of investments that are clearly identifiable as loss and damage finance are those that are now being invested in that fund. So I think it's too early really to make a full assessment of how those flows will relate to our existing definitions of climate finance and whatever might emerge from the NCQG negotiations next year. Yeah, I think that covered everything. Thanks.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up now. So thank you all for coming, and I'd ask you just to look out for future press conferences coming in the coming days. And I'll see you next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.